The letter arrived without a seal, yet it carried a weight far heavier than any royal crest. Its delivery was unlike anything ordinary, not by courier, not by diplomatic pouch, but by the steady hands of a Saudi envoy, dressed in an immaculate white thobe, who stepped silently through the gates of the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, under the highest discretion. It was midday in Burkina Faso. The dry season sun hung low in a pale blue sky, scattering light across the ochre-colored palace walls. Inside, the marble floors reflected the thin shafts of light that pierced through half-drawn curtains. The air was still, thick with the faint scent of polished wood and paper. The Saudi diplomat, tall and composed, bowed slightly before presenting the envelope to a palace aide. No wax emblem adorned it. No decorative flourish, just plain, cream-colored paper. But in the world of politics, sometimes the absence of symbols spoke louder than the presence of them. At first glance, the document inside seemed harmless, a polite, carefully worded invitation to the Riyadh Vision 2035 Forum. There were no threats, no ultimatums, only the formal courtesies of international diplomacy. Yet President Ibrahim Traoré, standing at the wide window of his office and letting the words roll once more through his mind, saw what others might have missed. This was no mere invitation. It was a test. The note was brief, almost too brief. His Royal Highness Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, invites you to a private summit on Pan-African development strategy. Attendance is expected. Your presence signifies cooperation. Expected, not requested. The choice of words was deliberate. Expected, not requested. It was the kind of language that slid under the skin, neither hostile nor friendly, but heavy with implication. Traoré's gaze drifted from the paper to the horizon outside. The land beyond the palace walls stretched endlessly, dry earth blending into the pale sky. He saw a boy walking along the dusty road, barefoot, carrying a bucket of water so large it seemed impossible for him to hold. The boy's shoulders strained, the thin muscles of his arms taut. Yet he kept moving. The president's mind lingered on that image. The burden on that boy's back felt more honest than the polished promises and gold-edged offers of faraway powers. That boy's weight was survival. The weight in the Crown Prince's letter was something else entirely. Behind him, a soft knock broke his thoughts. Marie, his closest advisor, stepped into the room with the quiet confidence of someone who had been in his inner circle long enough to read his silences. She glanced at the letter on his desk and then at his face. "Should we decline, sir?" she asked, her voice measured but holding the faintest trace of defiance. Traoré did not answer immediately. His eyes were still on the horizon, still on the boy fading into the shimmering heat. "No," he said finally, his tone calm but resolute. "We'll go, but not to obey." 3 days later, the presidential jet descended into the golden haze above Riyadh. From the cabin window, Traoré saw the sprawling city spread out beneath him, an intricate web of highways, glass towers glinting in the sun, and vast construction sites where cranes stabbed the sky. This was a city built to impress, built to project power. On the tarmac, the reception was as lavish as it was calculated. 2 massive gold-plated pillars flanked the entrance to the terminal, silk banners rippling in the warm desert breeze. A fleet of gleaming black SUVs stood in perfect formation. Cameras flashed as officials in white robes and keffiyehs approached with rehearsed smiles. The Riyadh Vision Forum itself was a display of wealth and influence in its purest form. Leaders from across Africa gathered, beneath chandeliers, so grand they could have funded a rural hospital for a decade. The scent of rosewater and oud hung heavy in the air. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved silently between tables, carrying trays of exotic fruit and crystal glasses of sparkling water. The conference hall was designed to awe: vast ceilings, marble columns, and an enormous LED screen stretching nearly the entire length of the stage, pulsing with slogans in gold and white: stability, progress, shared leadership. When Traoré entered, conversations faltered, and dozens of cameras pivoted toward him. The Saudi host, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, stood at the center of the stage, dressed in traditional white robes with a gold-trimmed bisht draped over his shoulders. His smile was warm, but his eyes carried a quiet calculation, measuring every movement, every breath. Ah, MBS said in perfect, fluid English, his voice carrying across the hall. The revolutionary himself. Traoré gave a slight nod, neither bowing nor smiling. I came for a conversation, he replied, not a coronation. A ripple of amusement moved through the room. The Crown Prince laughed politely, gesturing toward the long conference table, where world leaders and ministers were seated. Then let's talk, my friend, he said smoothly. We have a continent to shape. The banquet room was a testament to excess. The plates were the size of shields. The forks and knives plated in gold. The chandeliers above throwing fractured light across the polished floor. Yet, for all the glitter and shine, what unsettled Traoré most was not the wealth, it was the silence. African presidents, ministers, and technocrats sat quietly at the table, nodding as MBS spoke of partnership, guidance, and shared futures. None interrupted, none questioned, none challenged. The Crown Prince raised a glass of sparkling water, his voice carrying with the ease of a man used to being heard without resistance. We stand at the dawn of a new Africa, he declared. One that moves with vision, guided by experience. Saudi Arabia, with its resources, stability, and leadership, will help steer this future. Together, we will lead Africa into its golden age. The applause came instantly, eager, safe applause. All but one man joined. Traoré's hands remained still on the table. His gaze locked on the Crown Prince. MBS noticed. He shifted his body slightly toward him, his tone sharpening just enough to be felt. President Traoré, he said, surely you agree. Africa benefits when guided by those who have already built greatness. Your country could thrive with our investment, our infrastructure, our knowledge. What is revolution without resources? A hush spread through the hall. Traoré rose slowly from his seat. He did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. You speak of guidance, he began, as if we are blind. You speak of leadership as if we are lost. The Crown Prince smirked. Not blind, he replied, just inexperienced. Traoré's eyes never wavered. Your Excellency, Africa does not require a shepherd. It requires memory. Memory of who we were before maps divided us and foreign hands weighed us down. The silence deepened, pressing against the walls. Many African leaders avoided his gaze. Others shifted uncomfortably. Africa doesn't need to be led, he continued, turning his attention fully back to MBS. It needs to be heard. The cameras kept rolling. The sentence hung in the air like a crack in glass. The letter arrived without a seal but carried a weight heavier than any royal crest. It was hand-delivered by a Saudi diplomat to the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, under the highest discretion. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, a polite invitation to the Riyadh Vision 2035 Forum. But to President Ibrahim Traoré, the meaning was unmistakable. This wasn't an invitation. It was a test. The note was brief. His Royal Highness extended his personal request for Traoré's attendance, citing the importance of new voices in shaping the Gulf shared future with Africa. In diplomatic terms, this was honey on the blade. Traoré leaned back in his chair, staring at the gold-embossed script. He could smell the layers beneath, economics wrapped in politics, politics wrapped in influence, and influence wrapped in something far more dangerous. Saudi Arabia didn't invite leaders like him without reason. If they wanted him in Riyadh, it was because someone, somewhere, was trying to pull him into their orbit. The letter arrived without a seal but carried a weight heavier than any royal crest. It was hand-delivered by a Saudi diplomat to the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, under the highest discretion. At first glance, it seemed ordinary, a polite invitation to the Riyadh Vision 2035 Forum. But to President Ibrahim Traoré, the meaning was unmistakable. This wasn't an invitation. It was a test. The note was brief. His Royal Highness extended his personal request for Traoré's attendance, citing the importance of new voices in shaping the Gulf shared future with Africa. In diplomatic terms, this was honey on the blade. Traoré leaned back in his chair, staring at the gold-embossed script. He could smell the layers beneath, economics wrapped in politics, politics wrapped in influence, and influence wrapped in something far more dangerous. Saudi Arabia didn't invite leaders like him without reason. If they wanted him in Riyadh, it was because someone, somewhere, was trying to pull him into their orbit. The dawn light crept slowly over Riyadh, but inside the Grand Hotel suite occupied by President Ibrahim Traoré, the morning felt heavier than the desert heat outside. The echoes of the previous night's summit still lingered in the air, a charged silence filled with anticipation and uncertainty. Traoré stood by the window, watching the city slowly awaken, his mind replaying every moment of the confrontation that had unfolded hours before. His defiant words, "My word is not for sale, and neither is my country," had become a viral anthem, spreading across social media like wildfire. The clip was no longer just a video. It was a symbol of resistance that resonated deeply across the continent. Adama, his trusted security chief, entered quietly, phone in hand. "Sir, the video has exploded. Millions of views, tens of thousands of shares in just a few hours. The response is overwhelming." Traoré didn't smile. "Good. Let the world see that Africa can stand without bowing." Outside the suite, the wheels of global power turned swiftly. In Riyadh's royal chambers, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman convened a crisis meeting. His advisors sat stiffly around the table, their faces masks of controlled concern. "Traoré is not just a thorn in our side," the prince said, voice low but sharp. "He's becoming a rallying point. If we don't respond, our influence will erode." Meanwhile, back in Ouagadougou, the effect of Traoré's words rippled through the streets. Thousands gathered outside the presidential palace, not in anger or protest, but in unity. Signs bearing the slogan "Africa leads itself" waved above the crowd, chants rising like thunder. What began as a speech had ignited a movement. In the shadows, not everyone welcomed this awakening. A group of businessmen with ties to foreign investors met discreetly in an upscale restaurant. "He's isolating us," one muttered, swirling his wine. "No investor will come now." "But pride comes with a price," another replied. "Our economy could suffer if this continues." The third, older and quieter, stared at a screen showing the viral clip. After a long pause, he said, "Or perhaps he's curing us of complacency." The battle lines were drawn. Traoré's stand against foreign influence marked a turning point, but the pushback was swift and calculated. A private meeting in Riyadh sealed the tension. Traoré was escorted to a windowless conference room, where 3 senior Saudi officials awaited him. Their eyes were cold, their words precise. "Your rhetoric threatens investments across Africa," the lead official warned. "You risk isolating your country." Traoré stood firm. "We have endured silence and oppression for centuries. Our silence ends now." The meeting ended with no compromise, only the looming threat of economic retaliation. Hours later, Saudi Arabia announced the cancellation of several key bilateral agreements with Burkina Faso. Yet Traoré remained unbowed. "They may try to starve us," he told his advisors, "but we will not kneel." As the summit drew to a close, an unscheduled opportunity arose. African delegates, emboldened by Traoré's courage, urged the organizers to give him a platform. On a panel titled "Future Partnerships, Africa and the Gulf," he stepped forward. His voice was clear and unwavering. "For too long, we were told to seek guidance, to depend on others for our future. But Africa is not a prize to be auctioned. We reject deals that bind us with chains." Some in the room applauded quietly. Others sat in silence. Cameras captured every word, broadcasting his message across continents. Back in Riyadh, the Crown Prince watched with growing frustration. "Ideas are harder to silence than armies," he said quietly. Meanwhile, across Africa, the flame of resistance spread. University lectures referenced Traoré, murals appeared, and crowds chanted the rallying cry. But covert efforts to destabilize him also began to take shape. This was no longer a political debate. It was a revolution of voice, dignity, and self-determination. The international media quickly picked up on the speech, dissecting every phrase, analyzing the bold stance taken by a relatively young and defiant leader. Headlines ranged from praise to concern, but none could ignore the fact that a new tone had been set. This was no longer business as usual. Across the African continent, the speech sparked widespread conversations. In universities from Nairobi to Lagos, students debated the meaning of sovereignty and the risks of dependence. Radio hosts replayed the viral clip, dissecting Traoré's words line by line. Social media was ablaze with hashtags demanding autonomy and respect. Yet, the backlash was swift. Influential figures with economic interests aligned with the Gulf powers began to question Traoré's approach. Meetings behind closed doors contemplated economic sanctions, political isolation, and subtle forms of interference designed to weaken his influence at home. In Burkina Faso, government officials felt the pressure mounting. Some whispered doubts in private conversations, warning that the bold rhetoric might jeopardize crucial aid and investments. But Traoré's inner circle remained steadfast, rallying around the message that had captured the hearts of millions. One evening, as Traoré reviewed intelligence reports with Adama and Marie, his chief advisor, a confidential message arrived. It detailed an emerging campaign, aimed at destabilizing his government through disinformation and division. "We knew this would come," Marie said calmly, her eyes sharp with resolve. "They fear the power of a leader who speaks truths." Traoré nodded. "Then we must prepare, not just to defend, but to lead. Our people deserve nothing less." Meanwhile, the Saudi-led coalition worked quietly but aggressively. Economic levers were pulled, diplomatic pressure applied, and attempts made to sway neighboring nations against Burkina Faso's leadership. The aim was clear: isolate Traoré and force compliance through hardship. But the president refused to yield. At a national address broadcast live across radio and television, he spoke directly to his people. "My brothers and sisters," he began, voice steady, "we face a challenge greater than any before. They offer gold in one hand and chains in the other. We reject both. Our dignity is priceless." The speech resonated deeply. Streets filled with supporters, and the government saw an unprecedented surge in national unity. In the diplomatic sphere, the Riyadh Vision Forum closed with a sense of unfinished business. The Gulf states, though powerful, had been shaken by one man's refusal to be bought or intimidated. Traoré's message had unsettled the carefully constructed balance of influence. Weeks passed, and the struggle continued beyond the summit rooms and palaces. Across Africa, the movement inspired by Traoré grew stronger, but so did the covert efforts to undermine it. In the quiet of night, the battle for Africa's soul was fought in newsrooms, online forums, and whispered conversations. And at the center of it all stood one man, a flame burning brighter than the shadows that sought to snuff it out. As the dust settled over summits and boardrooms, Ibrahim Traoré stood not just as a president, but as a symbol, a beacon for a continent reclaiming its voice. His defiance against chains of influence ignited, a fire that no empire could extinguish. Africa's future was no longer dictated by distant powers but shaped by its own hands, its own dreams. The road ahead was daunting, filled with challenges both seen and unseen. Yet, with the flame of truth burning bright, a new dawn was rising, one where sovereignty, dignity, and hope marched side by side into history.